every good work, growing in the knowledge of God. Amen.
See? Well, good morning. Make sure that's turned on. We get the first slide up. I'm not a mathematician, so please, if I've made a mistake, you can giggle, you can laugh, just do it silently. So 8,760 hours in a year. 8 hours a day on average that we sleep, some more, some less, but we'll say on average 8 hours. That comes to 2,920 hours. And that leaves us 5,840 hours in the year. Now we spend, on average, 1.5 hours at church on a Sunday. Again, this is average. Some of you less. Some of you are physically here, but not here. Some of you are always here. That's 78 hours a year with other Christians. That leaves us with 5,762 hours, or 240 days not at church. So I just wanted to think about that for a second. 240 days outside the church. 8 months you're away from other Christians. So over the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at this book, Fruitfulness on the Frontline. If you haven't read it, I do have some copies. I highly recommend it. It's a really good book. It's now maybe 10 years old, roughly. Really, really fantastic book, and really an encouraging book. And we're going to be looking through this over the next 7-8 weeks. And Mark begins with chapter 1 with a very familiar story that most of us, if you've been a Christian, would have heard about. This young girl would have been around 12, and she was captured by a large army. The army would have killed or captured anyone of fighting age and taken the young girls and boys as slaves. She was put in a strange home with strange customs, all worshiping a strange god. Now this girl followed the God of her ancestors, God of Abraham and Isaac, Jacob and King David. Certainly her God was bigger than these pagan gods. And yet her village was ransacked. She was taken captive and many of her family killed. Where is her God now? Why did he allow this to happen? And to make things worse, when she was taken captive, she was put as a slave to the army of the commander of the army that ransacked her village. His name was Naaman. But something good from this. You see, Naaman has leprosy. Maybe that's why he was so angry. Now imagine this young girl must have smirked every time she saw him. He deserved it, didn't he? All the things he's done, let him have it. Let's see if his pagan god can heal him. At least that's what I thought she would have thought. That's what I think she would have thought. But this girl didn't think like that. This girl loved her enemies way before this carpenter in Galilee said in Matthew 5 to love your enemies. But this girl didn't just love her enemies. She acted out on it. And in 2 Kings 5:3, this young girl told the mistress, who was the wife of Naaman, that if he wants to be healed, he needs to go to Samaria to be healed, to see the prophets there and be healed. This girl had every right to be angry. She had every right to hold back, every right to want justice for everything that's happened. But instead, she looked up to heaven and gave everything over to God. To God be the glory. Well, Naaman did go to the prophets, and he was healed of his leprosy. To God be the glory. Naaman became a believer in the one true God. To God be the glory. Naaman's household, his army, the officials in court, and even the whole nation, including the king, became followers of the one true God. To God be the glory. And all it took was one simple sentence. Can God really make that big of a change in one little sentence? Can he make that much of a difference with faith like a mustard seed? Can he make that much of a difference with 1 cup of water, with the widow's mite. This young girl was instrumental in changing the course of history. And get this, we don't even know her name. The Bible doesn't record it. She is just a girl, a slave, a nobody. She was young and uneducated, a slave living in the wrong place in the wrong job with the wrong type of people. She could not possibly have any influence over anything, and yet God used her. 1 Corinthians 1:26 says this, "Consider your own call, brothers and sisters. Not many of you are wise by human standards or powerful, not many of noble birth, but God chose what is foolish to shame the wise. He chose what is weak to shame the strong. He chose what is low and despised, the things that are not, to reduce to nothing things that are, so no one can boast." You see, God used the willingness of this girl. It didn't matter her education, her age, her sex, her physical abilities didn't matter, her position didn't matter, and irrespective of where she was at, God wanted to show her that he was the one true God, that he was the God of the universe, and that he can be her God. So here is my first question to you. What if God has placed you where you are specifically to serve his kingdom? What if in your disability, God wants to use you to influence those who come and look after you? What if God has placed you in the education setting that you're in so that you can be used by him, or your job, or going to the gym, or going to the supermarket, all with a purpose to do his will, to encourage and support, to guide and educate, to pray for and pray with. And you don't need to have a degree. You don't have to be on some mission field. And you don't have to be in church. Ooh, please hold the stones. God can still use you no matter what. Paul tells us in Romans 12:1, here's what I want you to do. Take your everyday, ordinary life and give it to God. Take your everyday, ordinary. Watering the garden, washing the car, playing bowling. Take your ordinary everyday and give it to God. And John 15 says, I am the vine. This is Jesus speaking. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. And this is where we get to the heart of the Christian lifestyle. We're called to bear fruit. We are called to have some sort of produce in our life. Nowhere in the Bible does it say, don't do anything. Nowhere is it taught, just wake up in the morning and just chill out and do nothing. We are called to do something. All of us are given a job. Go, welcome in, teach, send out. Marx, who's the author of this book that we're looking at, has written some true stories. He's changed some of the names, but I'm going to read some of them out. Chloe is a student, and she can't wait to graduate with her degree, so God can start using her and using her skills. She has plans and ideas to use the skills once she gets them to further God's kingdom. Ed is in a job he really hates. He wants to do something for God, but he doesn't like the job. And so for the last 2 years, he's been looking for a new job so that he can have more time to commit to doing stuff in the church. Chris has been involved in church life for over 60 years. But she's had bad arthritis for the last few years and going to a hydrotherapy class. She believes her days of being useful to God are gone. She can't possibly do any more work for the church. Chloe, Ed, and Chris all want to serve God, but feel their circumstances are not useful to God. They all believe that their purpose will begin to see fruit when, I want to say that again, they all believe God will use them when circumstances change, when they are somewhere else, when they get the degree, when they are placed in a different location. God can't possibly use them on the front line, and Natalie was talking about the front line. They all believe their front line is either in the church building or out on a specific mission trip. Because when you go on a mission trip, you know you're being sent by God, and everywhere you go is holy and everything is great and wonderful. God can't possibly use us in the supermarket, can he? Now I asked you all, those of you who were here last week, shame on you for those who weren't, but I asked you all last week, who here believes they've been used by God over the last year? And I know some of us don't like raising their hands, but I have to say, and this is me being serious again, I know it doesn't happen very often, but I was a bit disappointed that not many of you raised their hand. I think there's only one or two. And what gets me worried is that so few of you said anything. Do some of you actually believe that God hasn't used you over the last year? I'm not asking you to raise your hands. I'm just asking you, do you believe God hasn't used you? Do you believe God can't use you, won't use you, or shouldn't use you for his kingdom? Mull that over in your head. Do you believe he can't use you, shouldn't use you, or won't use you to further his kingdom? If you believe that, biblically, you are wrong. Irrespective of what you think, God can still use you. Irrespective of whether you are a Christian or not, God can use you. Irrespective of whether you know the Bible inside and out, God can use you. And this is my second question. For those of you, there we go. I shouldn't have done the slide yet. I have to ask a question first, so pretend you haven't seen that. What is our job as Christians? I know this is difficult. What are we called to do? Shout it out. Go and make disciples. That's our job. So we have a commandment. For those of you who don't know, we're given a commandment, which is to love God and love each other. That's what we are called. That's what we're supposed to do. That's your command. Love God, love each other. Okay? But we're also then given a job, and that's called the commission. And that is to go and teach, witness, let people know about the lost. And so my question to you is, and this is, some of you might say otherwise, look at these hoodlums of children. Where are you going to find the most Christians? In church or outside? Or let me ask it better. Where will you find non-believers? Where will you find people who aren't Christians? In church or in the supermarket, in the bowling alley? This is where some of you go, like, probably in church. But on the whole, where are we going to find the most non-Christians? Where are we going to find the people who don't believe in God? In church or outside? Outside. Is everyone in agreement with that? We're not going to come in here and everyone's going to have, we're all not going to believe. So we're all in agreement. We will find those who don't believe in God out there. Yep, we're all in agreement with that. So we'll find them at the fish and chips, at the cinema, in the supermarkets. So when you leave this building, you engage in the world. And at some point, you will come in contact with someone who doesn't know God. And this is your front line. So the front line, I know Ali mentioned this a little bit, but the front line in battle is when you engage with the enemy. As a Christian, you are engaging in a spiritual warfare. And your front line as a Christian is anywhere you are presented with an opportunity to show someone or to speak to someone about the love and light of Jesus. All of us have a context where we can meet people we don't know. And it may be somewhere that you go every day. It may be somewhere you only go once a month. And you'll come in contact with people maybe every day or maybe only once every other week. But for 240 days a year that we are away from church, we have an opportunity to share Christ with other people. I want to say that again. For 240 days, there's some good numbers in here, and I hope they are right. I think they're roughly right. For 240 days a year, there's an opportunity for you to come in contact with someone who doesn't know Christ. Yeah. I've got another story, and you've got to listen because I'm going to ask a question afterwards. Isabel goes to a house group. Okay, so she's a Christian. She's a believer in God. But she doesn't believe she has a front line anymore. So she doesn't believe she's able to be used by God in circumstances, okay? She's retired. She's in her late 70s and just hangs out at home doing what retired people do. Because we all know that retired people just chill out and not do much. I did speak to someone who was retired. He goes, Shane, I'm busier now than when I had a full-time job. But there you go. So anyhow, she's retired and she's just kind of living out her days, enjoying life. And in her house group, they're saying about who has a front line and someone is working and someone does this. And she says, I don't believe I have a front line anymore. And they say, well, what do you do? Tell us about your family. What are your family like? None of her family are Christians. And she said, well, my granddaughter comes around the house every Sunday for a Sunday roast. And she asked me about church. Now, her granddaughter is not a Christian, but her granddaughter is interested in her grandmother's life at church. And she asked about what the sermon was. She asked about what the music was like. And she's doing this every single Sunday. Isabel doesn't believe God can use her anymore. She doesn't believe she has a front line. She doesn't believe that she has an opportunity to serve God. What do you guys think? Would you say Isabella, has a front line? Yeah? But she's not in church. Okay? But how is she going to tell people about God? She's not an evangelist. All she's doing is telling her granddaughter what she kind of does in church. How is that going to make any difference? But how? She's not in church. She's not an evangelist. She's just sharing an everyday situation to a granddaughter. You see, we all have a front line as a disciple of Christ. We all have an opportunity to be fruitful. And I want to talk about this fruitfulness in just a second. I think it's important to recognize that being fruitful isn't just about people coming to know Christ. This is definitely important and valuable and needed. But we have to be very careful, especially some of us who are older Christians. I don't mean older as in age older, I mean older as in being a Christian for a while. We've got to be very careful that we don't think we have failed because we haven't led anyone to Christ. That's not just the only way of being fruitful. Psalm 1 says this, happy are those who do not follow the advice of the world, but take the path that God offers. Their delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law they meditate day and night. They are like trees planted by streams of water which yield their fruit in its season. Godly living, shaped by godly obedience, leads to a life that fulfills the purpose God has for it. And this leads to fruit. It basically comes down to an attitude, word, or action that pleases God. Fruit is any consequence in line with God's will, and this could be handing out a cup of water, standing up for the marginalized, maybe picking up some rubbish or caring for a lost animal. I know we kind of think, well, that's just nothing. But God can use that. So can you see why when I asked you guys, was God using you over the year? And you think, well, I didn't bring anyone to church, or I didn't see anyone come to faith. Did you do things in your life over the last year which is a blessing to maybe someone else? That's fruitfulness. This is all about living for God. People that you work with, play computer games with, live next door to, see at the supermarket, all of them have an opportunity to hear about and see God in action. Our words and actions should reflect Christ. And the result of this is fruit. Maybe not in our time, but it will be in God's time. So I'm nearly done. Remember Chloe. Chloe is the girl that wanted to go to, or that was at college and was waiting. Okay? This is all true stories. So Chloe was waiting to finish college so God could use her. But she began to realize that God could use her where she was. She supported a friend through tough times, helped another friend make it home for Christmas, and even had a discussion with one of her lecturers. God was using her situation. Ed realized that although he was not really happy in his job, and I'm sure all of you love your jobs. Come on. We all love our jobs, don't we? God could use him. He recognized that. He began to get to work a bit earlier. Imagine that. I don't get paid to come in early. But he thought, God can use me. So he came in a bit earlier. He didn't cut any corners, but went above what was required. He looked for ways to bless people and even managed to pray for someone. You see, God was using Ed in the job he didn't want to be in because Ed decided to let God use him. And Chris realized she'd gotten to know people in the hydrotherapy pool really well. She began to open up about her faith and to show other people what God had done through her. The illness, and I want to reiterate this a bit more, the illness which stopped her from being active in church gave her a ministry outside of church. Okay? I know we know people, friends, family who are ill, they can't come to church. Their illness, God can use as a ministry outside. If your heart is honestly seeking God, you will find that every day you can bless others. Every day you can impact those around you. Every day you can be used to further his kingdom and to be fruitful exactly where you are. And this is why, I'm nearly done here, this is why when I ask that question about whether you think you can be used, if you genuinely think, I don't think God can use me, my life is not really the best. If you don't know your Bible, David, King David, a man after God's own heart, was a murderer. Just think about that for a second. Willing murderer, and an adulterer, and possibly a rapist. And he was still a man after God's own heart. Lazarus was dead. I could go through that whole list. I think it's quite funny because you have these people this person was a thief, this person was a drunkard, this person this, and Lazarus was dead. God can still use you. You don't have to be a Christian for God to use you. But if you are a Christian, you should be asking yourself, what am I doing that I can allow God to work through me to bless other people? Because every day, God can use you. So what do we do about it? Ask God to show you who to bless this week. Specifically. If you go home tonight, so I'm only going to speak to those of you who are Christians. If you go home tonight, this has nothing to do with your parents, nothing to do with your children, nothing to do with your partner, whatever. You go home tonight and I want you to say, okay, God, who do you want me to bless this week? How can you use me specifically this week? And each day, each night, you get back and I want you to dwell over that day. And I want you to see how God can, I firmly believe God will do that. If you have a willing heart and you're willing to listen, I firmly believe you'll come to the end of an evening and you'll go, ooh, God used me today. I was able to help someone. It may only be a cup of water, but if someone is really thirsty, that water is sweeter than wine, as they say, and it makes a huge difference to them. God will use you. If you're not a Christian, as I said before, I still believe God can use you. And I want you to ask, okay, so this is my challenge for those of you who aren't Christians. Okay, God, if you're not real, or if you are real, this is you and God. If you are real, I want you to show me this week how I can bless someone, but I also want to make it more specific. I want you to send someone who will bless me. But you have to give God the glory for it. So God, if you are real, send someone this week to bless me. This is a challenge for those of us who are Christians, because you might be the person that has to bless that other person. And if you are choosing, this is getting deep now, if you are choosing not to listen to God, you are stopping that movement. Is everyone with me on this? Is everyone kind of clear? This may be theologically a bit difficult to understand here, because God can do the miraculous. But if you've got someone here in this building right now who doesn't really know Christ, and they're saying, okay, Shane, I'm going to do that tonight. I'm going to go home and I'm going to look up and say, okay, God, if you are real, send someone this week to bless me. And God may be sending the Holy Spirit to convict you who are Christians to go, I need to bless someone today. Who am I going to bless? We never know what God is going to do, but I firmly believe God will work through those who are believers and will work through those who aren't believers. That's what I believe, okay? And that's my challenge for this week, for you guys to do that. I'm going to leave it there.